welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. This is our 8th podcast, and I'm so happy that you're with us today. We've got 3 more great conversations to share with you. But before we do that, I've got a couple of thoughts. The first is that as I talk to teachers around the country, I'm getting the sense that we're finally starting to settle in. We're starting to find our rhythm, find our flow, find our teaching style with the internet, with distance learning, with not having the opportunity to see our students face to face. And I know when you do that, you're probably working harder than ever. It's labor intensive to do this, and it's very tedious. A couple of things to consider as we make those assignments and as we work with our students. First of all, we got to realize that those students have other classes besides our band class, and we've got to be really respectful of their time. The next thing is we want to make sure that we're giving them assignments that are relevant, assignments that are important, assignments that keep them playing their horn and keep piquing their interest and excitement about being a part of our band program. You know, whether you're using Zoom or Google or Microsoft or whatever you're using as a platform to reach your students, there's one other thing we have to be careful of, and that is that we don't assign busy work. And I'm sure many of you right now are involved with teachers' meetings through your school, departmental meetings, something that's taking away from time that you really need to plan for instruction. And planning for instruction may be one of the most important things that we do right now, because in the words of Mies van der Rohe, the incredible Dutch architect, less is more. And less may be more for us as we approach distance learning, giving them assignments that they can handle, that they can be successful with, that they enjoy, keeping them excited, making sure that when classrooms return, those kids will return with them. You know, the other thing that I've noticed is that there's going to be some great takeaways from this distance learning. The amount of resources that are available online, on YouTube, on the internet, the amount of resources that were there prior to the coronavirus ever happening, things that we were totally unaware of. And as we go through this, we need to make a list. We need to keep a notebook and jot down things that we want to put in our toolbox that we can call and share with our students when the time is appropriate down the road. As I mentioned in an earlier podcast, we're going to be talking to high school band directors and middle school band directors from around the country. These are people that have good, solid programs. They may not have performed at the Midwest Clinic or the Music for All symposiums in Indianapolis, but they're good, solid programs, and they're great teachers who are making a difference every day with their students in the classroom and now out of the classroom. First young man is Matt Ingelson. Matt's the band director at Desert Hot Springs, California. He's been teaching for 5 years, and he shares with how his approach to teaching has changed and the thing he realized once he started teaching in an area that he was familiar with. Our second conversation is with Dr. Steve Gage. Steve is an incredible teacher and an incredible musician. I first got to meet Steve at Emporia State University when I was a high school band director back in Kansas. He's a brilliant guy. He talks about what he expects from his students and how he gets it. And he shares a beautiful tidbit that he remembers from Frederick Fennell that influences his programming. And it should influence yours as well. And finally, we're going to end up with a great organized guy from Van Wert, Ohio, Robert Sloan. In fact, when I first talked to Robert, he was the guy that said, you got to get Dr. Steve Gage on here because Dr. Steve Gage is a rock star. Well, in my mind, I think Robert Sloan is a rock star, and he does a fantastic job with his program, and he's got some wonderful stories to share. And by the way, at the end of the interview, he's going to give you a great recipe that you can use on your barbecue grill. So that's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. We'll be right back.
Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends is made possible through the support of Hal Leonard, Eastman Musical Instruments, and Vandercook College of Music.
Well, joining us on Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends is a young man who I have great respect for, and he's been a terrific help as I launched this podcast over 6 weeks ago. His name is Matt Ingelson, and Matt was a student at Vandercook College of Music, and most importantly, right now, he is the director of bands at Desert Hot Springs High School in Desert Hot Springs, California. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So you've been at Desert Hot Springs now how many years?
This is the end of my 5th year. So, 5 years.
So you've had time to kind of figure out which key opens your office door and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. I've got the same plight of many band directors with too many keys, but at this point, I know most of them.
So Matt, before the coronavirus struck, you were teaching. What was different in teaching than you expected it was when you came out of college?
I think the biggest thing that I learned in my first couple years of teaching was just how important it is to understand the culture of the school that you're teaching at. Desert Hot Springs, even though I grew up here in the Coachella Valley, I grew up in Palm Springs and Palm Desert, and that community kind of had one culture, and I didn't spend a lot of time in Desert Hot Springs growing up. When I came back, I thought I kind of really knew what the vibe was and what the scene was, if you will. But learning what my students' journey is every day, and finding out what it's like with their families, what they go home to, how they get to school, like how hard it is in some cases, even just to practice. It really changed my my teaching strategies a lot. For me, there's nothing that can happen in music in any classroom really, like math, English, that will be absorbed by our students if we don't meet them where they are. And so yeah, I think the big thing that I really, really have been focused on for literally 5 years has just been learning the culture of my students. And it's not like a cultural thing. It's just literally the culture of the city that I'm in.
Right. There's a great line from the old musical, The Music Man, when they're on the train and they're kind of talking, and the guy says, "Yeah, but you got to know the territory," and you're exactly right. I mean, learning the culture of your school is so vitally important. So let's talk a little bit about the culture. I mean, you teach in a very poor area. You have an abundance of impacted students. So you kind of alluded to a few of the challenges they face, but what do you see the challenges those kids face on a daily basis?
Yeah, well, so I'll talk marching band to start. So one things that's really unique about my area is that I live in a desert, and it's 120 degrees all the way from May up until, truly the beginning of October. So one of the things that a lot of the band directors out here like really deal with, or scheduling outside marching band during the heat. That's one layer of difficulty that has nothing to do with the human beings that are in my program. But when we started really kind of trying to negotiate that, we tried it after school and whatnot. But one of the things that we found was when we moved things really late in the night, a lot of my students couldn't get rides to and from practice because a lot of their families in our community work jobs that are outside and therefore meet really, really early. So one of the things, just on a very pragmatic level, that really helped with attendance and helped with participation ultimately just in that one program was moving stuff to 6 a.m. At 6 a.m., I'm able to get every single student out to the marching field every single morning. It works better for my community. It's not really that fun for me. And it means that, like, I've had to make huge lifestyle changes. But one of the things in the community that I work in is that a lot of the families work in service industry jobs, and in order to meet my students where they are, that was just one of the things that we had to do. Unlike a lot of the other schools in my district and in my area, 98% of my students require instruments from me. So so a lot of my strategy is, how do we A, repair our instruments, and B, provide them instruments that are equitable to what other students would be receiving, so that their music education isn't held back. Because in high school, like, we do have to start looking at more advanced literature, and we have to kind of keep on pace. But the flip side of things too, that I've learned that is just a real positive, above and beyond everything else, is just how central music is to a lot of my students' life. And I end up sending a lot of students to college that at least minor in music, if not major, just because in our environment, like, our students come to school not necessarily to go and sit in a math class and an English class. They come for band. But in socio, which we know, like, every band director knows that, but in a really socioeconomically disadvantaged area, it takes on just like another extra layer of meaning. And so it means that we're able to really reach them if we can kind of overcome some of these hurdles.
So when this coronavirus hit, it probably impacted your students a little bit differently, because so many of them do use school instruments, and because of their socioeconomic condition, probably not every student has access to distance learning. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're really, really struggling with that, particularly in the first couple days. Our school implemented, like, as large a kind of rollout of hotspots and Chromebooks to our students. But the thing is like, what we're learning is communication is really, really difficult without the internet. And not necessarily in band quite so much, but we do have a lot of students at our school that are officially homeless, and we have students that we're aware of that have trouble getting electricity, and just some things that we really, really take for granted. And so
Matt,
yeah.
excuse me, but so when you talk that they're officially homeless, are they living in shelters or?
Yeah, there's I'm not going to pretend like I know the nuance to what the official definition is, but we do have a significant population at Desert Hot Springs High School that per the state's definition are officially, like, they don't have a residence. So it could be that like, mom and dad left left town, and the kid is at home, and so they're with an aunt or an uncle, or in some cases, I mean, we literally, we do have kids on the streets.
Wow. Jeez.
Yeah.
Impossible. That seems impossible, doesn't it?
It's really tough, but I mean, music just takes on, as I said, music takes on a totally different meaning. And honestly, some of the kids that are heaviest hit by some of our toughest situations are the best band students, because they come to school and band is their home. And so in this COVID crisis, it's really hard because they don't have that. And I do, one thing that I'm aware of is a real reality is so many of my students are taking care of their brothers and sisters, and they're, I have a lot of students that were working what are deemed essential services now, in like fast food restaurants and like small businesses, in maintenance and stuff like that. And so distance learning isn't like really a reality for them right now, because they're like some of the people that are propping up our economy, just period and stop. And so, it's just challenging to really wrap our heads around what this world looks like now. And my only solution is that we've just got to make band as fun and accessible and easy as possible right now.
Well, you did something that I think was terrific, and it made band fun. I wish I would have been smart enough to send in a recording of it, but it made band fun. And I think what else it did is that it provided a vehicle for your students to kind of be on par with other students. And that was the Coachella Valley Virtual Concert Band that you inaugurated and launched your first performance. Give us a little short rundown on what that project was and how it came to be.
Yeah, so in the first couple days of the quarantine, I was just on Facebook, and one of our local band directors posted a video of an honor band from Auburn, and the video featured 500 musicians that all submitted videos, and they were all kind of playing this Tyler Grant piece together. I watched it and I went, "Hey, I know how to do that." So the next day, I kind of thought about it. I sat down, made a website. I tried to figure out how to make it as simple and easy as possible for people to participate, so that there's no barriers to entry, or very few barriers to entry for the modern student. And what they have to do is we chose public domain pieces and set a click track to them, put some instructions up on a website. We have a Dropbox, and students it's not even students, it's everybody. We have band directors, we have members of the community, people from outside the Coachella Valley, but anyone can play along to the recording, and they send in a video of their part. I clean it up in my studio, and we put it all together, ship it to a video editor, and we have like a really, really nice product. And all sorts of people in the second week are like coming out. We've doubled our participation up to this point. We won't really find out what things are like until the deadline, but I'm expecting it to be pretty big this second time around.
And if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to a website that Matt's created called cvvirtualconcertband.com. Correct, Matt?
Yep, cvvirtualconcertband.com.
And that'll have all the information and instructions and things like that people need to get to be a part of it.
Yep. Yeah, everything's on the website. It's a 4-step process. And this week we also have a virtual jazz jam that we've got a couple like twists that we've thrown in here that we'll find out about once the video is out. So it's gonna be really, really fun and exciting.
That sounds great. So I know, Matt, you're very up on the internet. You're very up on your recording technology. I believe you just finished the master's degree online with Berkeley in recording technology and things like that. So what's one idea that you've looked at out there that you heard about out there that maybe you haven't done that you go like, that's interesting. I gotta explore that.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think a lot of teachers just kind of felt was that like we need to completely reinvent the wheel for distance learning. And the reality that I've really discovered is that a lot of things that we would create right now to create lesson plans and whatnot, they already exist, and musicians have been putting this out there for years and for, I mean, close to a decade now. So when I was creating the website, we were working on putting together a jazz jam, and one of the things that we really want to focus on is making sure that our students are able to improvise, and that they, you know, if they're improvising for several hours on day, they're thinking about music and they're really working on it. But when I went to YouTube specifically, I just found a ton of amazing resources that already existed, where like Wynton Marsalis is talking about, you know, like how to play a B flat blues, or, you know, we've got Amy Nolte, who's like one of the best jazz piano players in the country. You know, she's walking in real time through like how she comps and things like that. So right now we actually have like a really easy to use and simple means of going to our virtual library, which you know, in this case would just be YouTube. And we can get experts like inside our classrooms without sorry, without really even having to try hard. And so I guess just my message is, you know, like go out and try to find what other people are doing. There's a ton of musicians that are out of work right now, and I mean I'm talking to a lot of people on the daily that are just at home, you know, and they don't have a lot going on. So now is a great time to reach out to, you know, your friends who were in college who just took a different route, or anyone in your community who isn't working, and see if you can get them involved somehow in your distance plan. I think everybody has some kind of concept of what their classroom is going to look like when you come back from spring break. We're still on spring break right now. So if you're not on spring break, you know, you're already in the trenches. But um whenever, you know, you have to start implementing distance learning, like reach out to your friends and your you know, former classmates, or anyone that you know, because everybody, you know, more or less is in the same place and on the same page. And I think we can actually like really make something educational and worthwhile, and it's not just a band-aid. It's like it's real learning that we can do online without having to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's so much content out there that we are unaware of, and for us as teachers to provide our students with a series of links, or a series of, hey, ask these questions, do this kind of research online, I think is going to open them up to so much more information than we could ever give them at school. So I think that's a really good point in that. So last question. You get to meet one person that you've never met before. Who would that be, and what would you ask them?
Ooh, that's a really tough question. Uh, I think the person. Well, does it have to be alive
Doesn't
alive
matter.
or dead?
Be alive or dead.
Doesn't matter. The person who I've always wanted to meet was Miles Davis, and if I had to sum up everything into one question, I would. I guess I would just ask, you know, what is music to you? And specifically with him, uh, it's a really like kind of breadthy question, because you know, he's just like absolutely my inspiration, and you know, a musician who evolved so many times throughout his career. And so what's nearest and dearest to my heart is absolutely music. And when you have somebody who has evolved music in so many different ways, I really want to know what is going on in their mind. And so I think it's simple. What is music? But it's a really, really tough, big question. And so yeah, so that would be my answer.
Matt Ingelson, thank
Yeah,
you
no
so much
sweat.
for taking the time to be with us. Great information to gnaw on for so many of us. And we wish you well as you continue on teaching your students and dealing with this time of uncertainty for all of us. So be well, and thanks, and we'll talk again soon.
Hey, thank you so much.
It's great to catch up with Matt Ingelson. He's a sharp young man, and for only teaching 5 years, I'm so impressed with his level of maturity, his ability to really look at his community and know exactly what they need, and to adjust his whole style of teaching and what he's doing in his classroom to meet the needs of that community. That's pretty impressive. We're going to be back with Dr. Steve Gage in just a moment.
Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends is made possible through the generous support of the Eastman Music Company. From the first student instrument to the professional heirloom, Eastman Music Company is committed to crafting the finest instruments for musicians throughout the world. For more information, visit eastmanwins.com.
Joining us on Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends is a young man who I had the opportunity to meet many, many years ago when I was a band director that didn't know what the hell he was doing in Olathe, Kansas. And this young professional took the job at Emporia State University, and he immediately reached out to me and helped me. And though he's 100 years younger than I am, he was always like a father figure to me. So Steve Gage, welcome to Band Talk.
Oh, wow. It's great to be here, Charlie. I'll take all the nice words you said. I'll accept the word young, but I don't think I'm as young as you may think I am.
You're younger than me, I know that.
Okay, I'll accept that.
There's a great story I'll tell.
Okay.
There's an Italian restaurant I used to go to in Chicago all the time. And the bartender was a guy by the name of Rudy. He was the owner's father-in-law. And one night there was a bunch of young guys in there, and he goes, "Oh, they're a bunch of punks, Charlie." And he said, "You know what a punk is?" He said, "Don't you know?" He said, "That's anybody younger than I am." And about 2 weeks later, my father was in town. My father was 90 at the time, and went into the bar, and he sat there, and he's talking to Rudy, and Rudy goes, "Hey, I'm 80, you know." And my father kind of goes, "Well," he says, "Hey, I'm 90. And Rudy looks at me and he says, "Charlie," he said, "I'm a punk." So there you go. You're just a punk, right?
Okay, whatever
Okay.
you say, my friend.
But a
Sure.
well-respected punk, I might add.
You're too kind, Charlie.
So tell us where you grew up and how you got to Emporia and all that good stuff.
Sure. I actually grew up in Wyoming County in upstate New York. I was very fortunate. I had a high school band director. Don Hughes was his name. He was a World War II vet, a fantastic jazz trumpet player and pianist. And he settled in this small town in Western New York in a county that has more cows than people. And but he was a magnificent musician and a very inspiring person for me and many, many others, of course. So when I graduated, music was the thing I loved the most. And I think one of my favorite high school stories is my senior year going into the guidance counselor at my high school. And he asked me, "Where do you want to go to school?" And I said, "Well, I have a single mother household." And we talked about it, and she allowed me to apply to state schools. And that's wonderful. And he said, "Well, what are they?" And I listed them for him. Among them was Fredonia State. He goes, "Well, if you went to Fredonia, what would you major in?" And I said, "Music." He goes, "Music?" I said, "Mr. Lebansky, have you paid any attention to me while I've been in high school?" Nonetheless, the rest is history. I was a drum corps kid, and I was a drum set player, Charlie. Still try to do some of that. And I got to play a lot. Don Hughes was a fantastic mentor, and I spent way too much of the high school down in the band room like a lot of kids. I went to Fredonia, and I fell in love with concert music. My first orchestral experience was to watch the very young Michael Tilson Thomas conduct the Buffalo Philharmonic and Symphonie Fantastique, and my life has never been the same. I spent really remarkable. And so Fredonia came and went. I went and student taught. If I didn't like student teaching, or if I didn't do very well, I was going to go to law school. That was my second area. But I did. I loved student teaching, in particular working with this beautiful soul, Rosella Morgano, who taught the middle school band in Lakeshore with Steve Willis. And my goodness, what a magnificent person, but an inspiring music educator. Then I went looking for a job, and nobody wanted to hire a percussionist to be their band director. So finally, I accepted a position in Warsaw, New York, which is ironically right next to my hometown, where my mom actually was an alum, and my cousins were in the band, and my stepsister. So I'm pretty sure I got the job because my great uncle had been on the school board in Warsaw. That's how it works, right? And so I spent 2 years there, and I met so many great people who were very helpful to me. I always wanted to go to Eastman, Charlie, and I practiced while I was teaching, and I got a chance to go. So I went to Eastman, and I studied with the legendary John Beck and Don Hunsberger and a whole host of fantastic, David Efron, magnificent musicians and teachers. It was life-altering. When that was in process, I accepted a position in Auburn, New York, where I got to work with Norm Beamish, who continues to be probably my primary life mentor. He was like a father to me, and he just passed away. He sat in every one of my wind ensemble rehearsals, Charlie,
Wow.
for 9 years.
Wow.
All right. I mean, think about that. He had been a music educator himself for 30 years. I basically had student teaching for 9 more years. I met Gary Smith, the legend that he is, at one of those festivals of music things with my high school band. And he kept saying, Steve, you got to come visit Illinois. And he said it to me 5 or 6 years in a row. Finally, I took him up on it. I had a friend who lived in Chicago, and he went to Illinois. I drove up and hung out. We went to some clubs, and I asked him a lot of questions. I drove to Champaign, and again, life-altering, never looked back. Accepted an assistantship that day and attended there in the fall of '89. I did tell Mr. Keene and Gary, however, that because I was a father, I was a divorced person, but we had a child, and that I was obligated to be my son's one of his financial support groups. So after 2 semesters of school and 2 summers, I landed the gig in Emporia State, and thus comes the relationship with the inimitable Charlie Mangini. They were really nice to me there at Emporia, and I think Kansas is one of the coolest unknown places in America. I think you probably would agree with me.
It's pretty neat. It's pretty
Yeah.
neat. So you were at Emporia how long, and then did you go directly to Youngstown?
I did. I actually finished my degree in the summers, Charlie. The third summer, the second summer, I married my wife, Stephanie, who I met at Illinois. And she was teaching in the Wichita Public Schools. She was a band and orchestra director there for Dan Stifler, who's probably a name that you remember. And we loved Kansas. We particularly loved Wichita, but I hated the commute, 82 miles one way from our apartment to my job. In the third year, in the summer, we were getting ready to go back to Emporia, or to Illinois, for what would have been my last summer or second to last summer of doctoral school. And I got a phone call from one of my former high school trombone students, Rocco Criazzo, who said that Les Hicken, who was my predecessor here at YSU, had just accepted a position in his home state of South Carolina as director of bands. Would I be interested in coming and visiting? And Stephanie, they invited us both, treated us royally. I fell in love with the school, the region, and I haven't fallen out of love with it, Charlie, for 27 years.
That's wonderful. So let's go back to your high school. You mentioned that you met with your guidance counselor and he wasn't paying attention. What was your high school band experience like?
It was the 70s, Charlie, and most of the music that we played, Mr. Hughes was a really great commercial musician, and probably not a great trumpet, or not a great conductor, but a great musician. And we played, I remember the first thing I remember playing was the tenor drum part on Festivo by Václav Nelibel. And it's amazing how these things kind of perpetuate you. And The jazz band was probably the best group. We had what was affectionately known as the invisible high school marching band. If it was sprinkling on Friday morning, Charlie, we did not play the halftime show. But I was a drum corps kid, so marching band was a big part of my life.
Wow. So you've been teaching now for what, 25 years?
Collegiately 30.
30 years. Oh my God.
Overall 40, my friend.
So you are older than you look, really.
You're kind.
But
thank you.
How's your approach to conducting a band changed since your early days?
Wow. I had no business being a conductor, and I'm not so sure I do today. It's such an immense responsibility. I must admit to you, Charlie, there isn't a day that I'm not driving to school that my stomach doesn't twitch for fear that maybe I don't have enough to offer my students. So I've had this drive. It's intrinsic for me. I think it probably comes from a lot of sources, my mother especially, who always said to do my best. And so I try every day to become a better musician, a better pedagogue, a better conductor. The changes probably are the literature that I work with. You know, in Warsaw, the kids couldn't blow their nose, really. I mean, I learned to play all those instruments so I could play scales because they didn't think they needed to. And I thought if I could demonstrate those scales to them, then they would have to play them. And as poorly as I played, I could play them better than they could. And thus the cycle of becoming more pedagogically secure. And I, like most band directors, maybe I say it differently, but we feel the same way. I know enough about all those instruments to be dangerous, Charlie.
So, Steve, we know that the coronavirus has turned the world upside down right now, right?
Yes, sir.
Let's go back to the normal days,
Okay.
right? Before coronavirus, and we really met our kids face to face and all that sort of stuff. So when you are a student in your band, what should I expect from you? And what do you expect from me?
Those are the million-dollar questions, right? I mean, music education is a somewhat limitless career path, but it's also, I think, quite subjective, because I've never met a musician who was like any other musician. So to think that if I have 50, let's say we audition and we set our wind ensemble down, and the very first day, and I look at the students, and I know them all. I've been here long enough. I have now kids whose parents were in my band when I first came here. But I look inside their eyes, Charlie, and I try to see what's in there. And then how am I going to spend the time that I have with them every day over the course of their duration of their undergraduate or graduate experience? Convincing them to love music as much or more than I do. So since the literature is our textbook and it's our inspiration, I think I'm very, very careful about what I put in the folders. My expectations are that they would work as hard as I do. I promise them that I'll come into the room with preparation, and I'll work between rehearsals. I'll listen to the recordings of rehearsals. I'll take notes, and then the next day we'll just chip away. I think inside every ensemble, there's the Venus de Mayo, the block of granite on the first day, and then there's that sculpture in there, and that's what we do, right? We get as close to that perfection as we can. And my expectation of them is no different than it is of myself, Charlie. Their very best effort.
So they're kids, and even though they're young adults, and we've both been there.
Sure.
That they walk into a rehearsal and they haven't lived up to our expectations. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, I grew up in an era, and you did too, where music teachers, private and ensemble directors, were kind of autocrats. I had some teachers that were very good at making me feel really bad about myself if I didn't prepare things. They did it sometimes in a very overt manner. I never liked that, Charlie. I think inside me is a pretty soft person. I'm much more affected when I feel I didn't live up to whatever expectation people have of me. And that's kind of my psychological approach to this. And that is, if they don't sound good on a given day, I tell them. I mean, there are no pretenses in our rehearsals. I say things to them that some people would consider to be derogatory. When they sound awful, I say, that sounds awful. What's interesting though, is by building the relationship with them, sometimes before they come and certainly while they're there, I have an open door policy. And I'm getting phone calls every day from the kids who are struggling. They don't want me to tell them any different. I find that the commonality over these decades of musicians, especially, and I don't know other fields as much as I do, is that down deep, they know they want to be the best they can be. And I'm just part of their journey. And if the part of their journey that I am is very important to me. And I want them to value sitting in our groups as part of their elevation as an artist, as a musician, and even as a person, to be responsible. I want them to know that when someone gives them an assignment, they're not kidding. It isn't with anything that is beyond what's best for them. And so I have never changed as a teacher. I've just gotten older, maybe a little wiser. The older I get, Charlie, the less I feel like I know, the less secure I am about the things I say, but I do it with passion. And I go home every night and contemplate. I sleep on it, and the next day I go right back at it.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I know you're a real champion of literature, and one of the things that, whether you know it or not, when people out in the field talk about you, they know that you champion literature. So when you're programming for your ensemble, how do you balance the traditional, for lack of a better term, traditional band repertoire, wind repertoire, versus the new compositions that we're hearing? How do you balance that with your ensemble?
Well, probably like you at Vandercook, and I think most people at schools like I teach at, most of our kids are mus ed majors. In a 50-piece band, I might have 5 graduate students, Charlie. So the other 45 kids come from a variety of high schools. If they came from a place like Olathe North, the wonderful band program that you ran, they probably played things like the Holt Suites and some music of Percy Granger. But even if they did, you'll find those pieces dotting every one of my programs. I feel like these are standard literature for good reasons. They've stood the test of time. The artistic merit, the compositional style and skill of the composer. And plus, if they're going to go be a conductor, I would like to think that by doing it at Youngstown for the first time, that it'll be, or even the second time, that what they get from that experience, they can take into their either performance career or conducting career. But I also do a lot of new tunes. I just released a CD last spring, our 8th one, and so I'm trying to think. Joel Puckett's Shadow Cirrus is on there, and Dana Wilson's Shortcut Home. Everything else is new music. In this case, they're all written by my colleague, Dave Morgan. I've been part of probably 20 commission projects, Charlie. Like everybody in our profession, I go to conferences and I listen. If I hear something live or a really good recording that I think has artistic merit, I find a way to get it and put it in the folder. I think band is still a new music. I mean, Holtz was what, 1909 or something? 111 years is not very old. So I think we have to play new music.
So I was talking recently with a director at Van Wert, Ohio, Bob Sloan. Bob got his master's degree with us at Vandercook, and I was talking to him about the podcast. He says, "Oh man," he says, "you got to reach out." He says, "You've got to reach out to Dr. Gage." He said, "Man, he is the best. Man, if I need something, I always call Dr. Gage." So
sweet.
If I'm a high school band director, and I got a question about, I need some help in programming for festival or a competition or something like that, and I call Dr. Gage, what kind of advice are you going to give me?
Well, I'm going to back up just slightly, my friend. Your sphere of influence has been and continues to be profound. I don't think there's a band director in the United States, Charlie, that worked with more high school band directors than did you. And I know many, many of them that live in this valley who respect you with great admiration, as do I. So I'm going to start with that.
Thank you.
Bob is a great example of what I love about our profession. That is, he emanates passion. And I know that about him. So our conversation would start with, "Hey, how's it going? What do you got in your school?" Now, we're sensitive, all of us, even someone like myself, or say somebody like that's teaching at Michigan or Eastman, Mark's group. He knows the real strengths of this group. He knows who the soloists are, that he can comfortably put in those environments and those situations. So that my first question would be, hey, what's happening in your program? Are you particularly strong in some sections? And I think once I had that information, that would kind of steer my conversation. I think balance. I still think Freddie Fennell was right in programming when he said one for the head, one for the feet, one for the heart. So when that is my preeminent thinking as a programmer, that's where I would go. I love chorales, Charlie, and we both know most bands don't play them very well. They're much harder to teach. I'm about ready to do October again next fall, and I did it with Tim Shade, our mutual friend, as the solo euphonium player. It's on our first Naxos CD. By the way, Tim Shade is a great example of how I live and breathe. He was playing solo euphonium, and our ABA friend at Grove City High School, George Edge's high school band. He had this brilliant red aura about him, his hair. He played solo euphonium on something, I don't know what it was. I literally went up to George and asked if he would introduce me to Tim Shade, and the rest is history. That's how I functioned, my friend, for a long, long time. But so those kind of things, the head, the heart, and the foot. And I think if you don't play a march at contests, I think you're really short selling our medium. And I just heard at ABA a march that Frank, who the heck was that? I can't remember who conducted it. Oh, it was the accordion player. Oh my goodness. Stan Mikulski was conducting, and it was magnificent. It was one of the highlights of the conference, Charlie. He knows how to get a band to sound good on a march. It was amazing. And we're putting together Stars and Stripes for a virtual, because we don't know what to do, right? No one knows what to do. So we're going to do that with our wind ensemble. And I sent to them this magnificent video. I would encourage all of our colleagues to look at these two euphonium players in the Marine Band playing how to play a march. First, they play it one way that we often hear that's not very good, and then they play it the right way, and it's extraordinary. So one for the feet, one for the heart, because we've got to play songs. Down deep, there isn't a musician I've ever met whose heart isn't bigger than their body. I can cry at the drop of a hat, and I'm going to tell you, my friend, and we're good friends, 30 years. I've cried every day for the last month, every day, no guilt. All right, and then the head is the one where we have probably the most sensitivity to the technical and artistic demands. So if it's a small school band, maybe one of Brian Balmage's new tunes or something, or some of the old. What about Toccata for Band by Frank Erickson, right? And is there a prettier piece for wind band, my friend, than Air for Band by Frank Erickson?
Right.
I think not. So that's kind of where my conversation would go. And I would kind of, if I knew the student, if it was one of my students, and I know their propensity towards certain things, if I saw that they were repeating composer literature, even though some of these people are my friends, I would push them in different directions. But in general, I would want to know as much about their program as I can. So I go to the schools, Charlie. I always have and I always will.
That's great. So looking back over your years, if you had one thing you could do different, what would it be?
When I read your question, that's the only one that scared me a little bit. Because I don't think I would do anything different, Charlie. That's probably not the answer you want.
No, that's a great answer.
I teach the students who sit in front of me, Charlie. Now I work hard to go get them. Yeah. Trust me. All right. Like my story about Tim Shade, but we are blessed in our profession.
And
we touch the heart and souls of the young people that sit in front of us. And if we do a good job, they probably will never be the same. You know that because you're a great musician. You're a great teacher. You're an even better person, Charlie Mangini. Right. That's what we get to do. And I've been paid for this for 40 years. Think about that.
Yeah, I know it. Our good friend, Tim Lotzenheiser, who, by the way, said to say hi to you. I talked to Tim this morning.
Likewise.
We always say, you don't drive through life with your hands on the rearview mirror.
Wow. He's got all the quips, man. All of them.
So we're just forging ahead.
Yeah.
And speaking of forging ahead, Steve, I can't wait till the next time that we get to be together and I get to give you a hug, because I always like to do that. You're just a great person and a great human being, a great teacher. You're blessing our profession, and you've blessed your students, and you've blessed this podcast. So thanks, B, so much for joining us today, and hope to see you soon.
You're welcome, Charlie. My very best to you and your family. God bless you.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Dr. Steve Gage. I'm always impressed with his level of sincerity and the amount of caring that he brings to every conversation that we have. He's a gem in our profession, and he's a great resource for any of us who tap into that knowledge and wisdom that he brings with him everywhere he goes. We're going to wrap up today's podcast with a fun conversation with Robert Sloan, the band director at Van Wert, Ohio. We'll be right back.
Vandercook College Music is proud to support Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Vandercook is the only college in the nation solely devoted to the practical education of the school music teacher. If you have a student who wants to teach music, or if you or someone you know is looking for a great, practical Master of Music education program, then look no further than Vandercook College of Music in Chicago, Illinois. Vandercook also has the largest array of on-campus and online classes in their Mecca continuing education program. To learn more about Vandercook, visit vandercook.edu.
So one of the things we're going to do here on Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends is to check in with various band directors from around the country to see how they're coping with the coronavirus. And we got on the line Robert Sloan, and Robert is the director of bands at Van Wert, Ohio. Robert, how you doing?
Doing good today, Charlie. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So, Robert, you've been at Van Wert for how many years now?
This is 18 years.
Oh my gosh, time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it?
It does.
Wow, that's great. So, I believe when we met, you were a graduate student at Vandercook College of Music. And if I remember right, you were a student of Mark Kelly at Bowling Green, Ohio. Is that right?
No, I went to Ohio State, actually.
So I just lied. That's the Ohio State you went to. Come on. They're going to revoke your degree if you just say Ohio State.
That's right. No, go Bucks. The Ohio State University. Yeah, I did my undergrad there. Graduated in 1998. So I was between the great Craig Kirchhoff and then Russ Mickelson, who's now there, who's great. So I was between those two.
Absolutely. Couple of great directors. So you had a great upbringing. So that's
Absolutely.
good.
Yep.
And then you got your master's at Vandercook, and that's where we met.
Yes.
And so any fond memories of that place?
Oh, tons. Too many to describe. I mean, meeting the people, that are in the program and, adult directors. I was pretty young when I started the program. I think I was in my second or third year of teaching, and that was perfect for me. I got a great undergrad at Ohio State, but of course there are always gaps in the education. So I taught 2 or 3 years, figured out where I needed to fill in those gaps, and then Vandercook was the gaps to fill in. It was so practical and everything, and lots of great memories of friends and students. And I've listened to the podcast, and Kevin Lepper's voice, brings back a lot of very fond memories, music history, the way it should be taught. The list could go on. Yeah, tons of awesome memories.
That's great. So then you were gone for a while, and then I can't remember. Did you bring your kids back to Vandercook for a clinic first, or did I come out to see you at Van Wert?
Well, it all kind of happened about the same time. We came to Chicago in 2016 in about March or so. Did a clinic at Vandercook, and then we joked around about having you out later that year, and you happened to be in the area recruiting in Northwest Ohio and Northeast Indiana. And so you came and worked with my kids right before our state adjudicated event. And that was all kind of in the span of a couple of months. And then, of course, a couple of years later, you were out to Van Wert again. We host our OMEA festival. And so you were District 3 honor conductor in, I think that was 2018.
Yeah, and you know what, Robert, to your credit, that was one of the most well-organized events I've ever been a part of. Oftentimes you get invited to these things, and they're really a train wreck. There's surprises all the time, and the schedule never works, and this is a problem, and that's a problem. But your thing went from start to finish. Actually, it went from way before it started with your great communication through finish without a hitch. It was really a wonderful experience. So thank you Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you. You had a great experience. The kids had a great experience. I had, I think, 8 or 9 kids in that group, and they loved every minute of it.
So, Robert, Ohio was one of the first states to shut down because of the coronavirus. How did you get the news, and what was your reaction?
Well, that whole week was a pretty crazy week. It was our contest and festival week, district festival weekend. So we had a concert on Tuesday night. Wednesday, OMEA, our Ohio Music Education Association, canceled weekend adjudicated events. So that was, we found out right before rehearsal. That was a little bit of a blow to the kids. Later that day, we heard rumors that the governor was probably going to shut down school for a while. We didn't know how long. That was Wednesday. Thursday in the late afternoon, we heard 3 weeks was what his original shutdown was. Since then, we've extended it to the beginning of May, and we'll see where it goes from there. So that was 3 or 4 days in a row. That was just kind of like you go from the intensity of concert and preparing for adjudicated event, and then all of a sudden you got 3 weeks off and have to figure out how to teach online. So it was quite a shock to the system to go through a couple of extremes there and uncharted waters of this virus.
So how do your students react when they heard the news?
Well, I think the first was lack of adjudicated event. We preach to our kids, it's not about ratings and it's not about judges, it's about performances. So the good thing was we got a performance in. We had a good concert on Tuesday night, and it's like, well, now we just don't know what's next. We'll plan for spring concert when we get back and see what happens and make it up along the way. We had spring break the following week, so I was only going to see them another couple of days. We kind of eased into this online learning experience with spring break. Of course, they were disappointed. I think, initially any teenager is going to say, "Oh, cool, 3 weeks off of school." And now I just had a meeting earlier this today with Zoom with some kids, and they don't like it. They'd rather be back in school. You miss what you don't know. And so there's a lot of disappointment. There's a lot of curiosity. There's a lot of, they don't know what's coming next with, we having prom and graduation and spring concerts, and a lot of things are up in the air. We're just kind of trying to play it, one step at a time.
So you've been doing this now for a couple of weeks with the kids on online learning. What's been the most successful thing that you've done so far?
Yeah, we're coming in. We've been doing it about 2 weeks. I think it's like being a first-year teacher again. You don't know what to plan for. You don't know how much to plan. You feel like every day is a failure, and that's okay because you find the success in the failure sometimes. But I think our biggest success is meeting face-to-face. We're using a platform called Zoom. I'm sure a lot of people are doing that. Google Hangouts, a pretty popular one too. We as a district chose Zoom. And we've put aside a lot of notes and repertoire, and we've been meeting, building connections and building relationships and meeting with kids and talking about music, but not talking necessarily about playing music, listening to music and talking about it and what it means and, what this world is right now. We're trying to get some musical instruction in there as we go. We're, of course, doing some video recordings and playing assessments and things like that along the way too. But when we meet face to face, we're just trying to enjoy each other's company, enjoy music, enjoy the deeper meaning of music, because I think that at this moment is probably more important than whether they can play this piece or that piece. So
anything that you planned or that you've wanted to do with the kids just flat out didn't work?
Well, and I'd seen some things online, and I thought we'd try it ourselves. We did try a bassoon sectional and trying to, play together over Zoom, and that doesn't work. There's too much differing lag times and things like that. There are ways to do it. You can only have one person play at a time. We've been doing some, play me examples of this measure and that measure. That's been much more successful with the 5th graders, 6th graders, because they can play all of line 23 and it only takes a few seconds, as opposed to, playing all of that high school repertoire piece isn't going to work. But, the kids really wanted to try playing online because that's what they really love about band is playing their instruments. And so, that doesn't work, not as in the traditional sense of having a sectional and they play and you comment, and we move on and they play and you comment. I mean, that's just not the reality in which we live, I don't think.
So are the students reacting any better now than when it started? Or are they still, obviously they miss being the face-to-face with you in the rehearsal?
Yeah, I mean, we all miss the face-to-face. It took them a couple of sessions, and they're having them with all their teachers. But, Zoom is great. It's a great tool, but it's weird. I mean, you're not there. So it took them some time to loosen up and, figure out how to mute and unmute and answer questions in the chat session. And, some of those things. Now that we've done, 3 or 4 of these, I'm more comfortable as the host, as the facilitator. They're more comfortable as the student. And now we're getting into, some multiple-sided conversations, because I don't think you can lecture. I don't think that's effective on Zoom, because they're going to lose focus really fast. Has to be a short piece of information, then let's have a discussion. And yeah, I think they're getting the hang of it. And it's not perfect, but it's the best we have. I keep telling them, and I hope it's not that get off my lawn moment, but when I was in 6th grade or high school, we would have just been sitting at home. We wouldn't have been able to do any of this. So it's not perfect, but it's better than we've ever had. And, and we're going to make the best of it. We're going to get some learning done and hopefully get better as people and as musicians.
Well, knowing you, yes, you make the best out of everything. That's what I love about you. So when this is over, well, that's good. So when it's over, do you think you'll change anything in your approach to how you direct your band or how you run your program?
Well, I think a lot of stuff. I mean, some of the things that we've done as far as online interactivity, as far as listening and reflecting assignments. I mean, I think, I don't care whether you're teaching math or high school band or 1st grade science. I think if you don't go through this 7 weeks, 8, however long this is going to be, if you don't come out of this with something that you want to take back to the traditional classroom, then I think you missed the mark. And I think all great teachers are going to find that thing. They're going to find 1 or 2 nuggets that, hey, why wasn't I doing this all along? Well, because necessity is sometimes the mother of invention. And you gotta, and now that you found it, it's like, hey, I'm going to keep doing this. So sure, I think there's already 2 or 3 things that I hope to continue doing in the future.
So here comes the toughest question I'm going to ask you now. So we traded some communication, and you said, if I ever wanted to have a mediocre band director and a guy who was a hell of a barbecue man, to get a hold of you. So I got a hold of you. So you got to share your favorite barbecue recipe with me, man.
Well, my favorite, I've been into smoking a lot. My favorite currently is burnt ends. I love doing burnt ends. It ends up kind of like little beef flavored candy. Fantastic. You put them on the smoker about 4 or 5 in the morning. You eat them at about 5 or 6 at night. And fantastic dinner. You got to look it up. There's plenty of websites out, smoking websites out there. You can buy yourself a good smoker and off you go.
So the next time I visit Van Wert, I'm coming for burnt ends. Is that a deal?
Guaranteed. Absolutely. Anytime.
That's great. Robert Sloan, you are the best, man. I love you to death. And thank you so much for being on the podcast, and give my best to your family. Okay.
You're so welcome. Same to you.
Robert Sloan is one of those folks in our profession who is organized and focused and dedicated, but still makes band fun. If you're ever around Robert when he's with his students, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. They feed off of his commitment and his energy. It's wonderful to be around. And I can't wait to get back to Van Wert, Ohio and try some of them burnt ends. They sound delicious. Well, next week on Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends, we're going to have a couple of more conversations with teachers from around the country, and our feature conversation will be with the composer Johann de Meij. Thanks for joining us. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.